work has started. What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to episode 2 of Road to the Rockies. This is the series where Matt from the Scale Builders Guild and myself are preparing to build 3 trucks for the SORRCA event that's going to be held in Colorado, the Rocky Mountain Regional Championships. And these are trucks that aren't new or aren't for this event specifically, but you haven't really seen much of this one at least, and that's going to play a big part in what you see today, because today I'm going to introduce you to my Class 1 project, which is going to be the Class 911 or 911, because we're going to be building a Porsche 911 for our Class 1 this year. It's going to be a project much like my Class 1 Jeep from last year, that's over the top with trying some things out that are new to me, and I'm not even 100% positive that I'm capable of doing them, but we're going to try. Then we're going to talk about the Class 2 project, which is going to be roughly based on my comp rig here that I've been running since about August of last year. It's a rough time frame. So this is the truck that we're going to kind of use to base a lot of that on. I'm not going to be using this exact one because I need this one for my local comp series, which doesn't get so strict on the SORRCA guidelines. And then Class 3, which is where I'm going to be needing some opinions. Let's first jump into discussions of the Class 1. As I mentioned, this is going to be the Class 911 build, and it's based on a Porsche 911. That model of 911 specifically, you may recognize as the kind of infamous Rothmans Dakar style 911. And that is actually kind of the basis for where we started with this. We found a model of that Rothmans available on CG Trader, I believe it was called. And that's a website that has 3D models that are of a much higher quality than what you would normally find on something like Colts 3D. However, these are not models that are ready for 3D printing. So we downloaded this model. The model itself was about $200 just for the CAD model to start for the base of this project. Now, I was able to bring that mesh into Fusion 360 so that I could start kind of manipulating it on a base chassis design that was pretty much the same as my Class 1 here. I'm going to be using a very similar drivetrain as far as like axles and suspension in some ways. So I know what kind of clearances I need when, flexed and steered in both directions. So I can make sure that I clearance properly in the areas that matter. So after placing that Porsche model about where I wanted, scaled roughly how I thought was fitting, I took and I sent that off, and Nix, who is a graphic artist that kind of specializes in BeamNG cars, an awesome video game. He's got a ton of mods for it specifically, and he cut the fenders on that and helped me get rid of some features that were going to be very difficult for me to be able to use in a way that was gonna make it workable in Fusion 360. But after he was done, I spent a ton of hours taking a mesh file, which is just it's almost like a 2D surface. It has no depth to it. It's just a flat surface. And I had to then create it into a solid in a really just difficult manner. And it may not be difficult for people who are much more versed in it than I am, but for someone who's never done that type of work before, or very limited at it at least, it turned out to be a tremendous amount of effort to get where I needed to. But I believe at this point we're sitting where most of the pieces of the model are pretty close to ready. And what I mean by ready is they're put into these solids that are great big bulky things that extend into the middle, and that's because I need those solids to create molds so that we can do the carbon fiber molding like you see here on my Class 1. I did a couple of different methods on that. We went over a little bit of that in the last video, but we're going to be doing a similar method to what we did on the hood here, which helps keep things thin and light. And I have some extra techniques that I'm hoping to incorporate to make sure that it stays super thin, super light, and legal in all ways. So we'll get into that as I get further into the design. With the 2023 rule changes for SORRCA, you can't have any of the suspension visible through the body. Even this Class 1 Jeep that I had last year technically isn't legal because the shocks are up through the back of the rear interior there. So this just needs a simple cover that goes over that. That's not a big deal. But with the Porsche, the shocks want to come through the hood. So I'm gonna have to move those back, lay them down while making sure I maintain clearances everywhere. But the bigger problem yet is going to be things like servo placement. If I was trying to use the same style that I did here, where the servo sits up front, actually underneath of this faux air box, well, that would be sticking almost halfway through the hood, even with a low profile servo. So we're gonna have to relocate and re-engineer a lot. My thought at this time is that we're actually going to take that servo and move it back in the chassis. And I'm going to come up with a steering system that will link everything back together. There's a couple of different options for that. One may be an obvious thought, one much less obvious. We'll see which one wins. The next thing was the whole roof of that. Now you can see in these models that I've just got, fenders, hoods, sides, rear trunk area, and I don't show a roof at all. And that's by design, because after looking at it and kind of breaking it up in the construction style that I wanted to go for, what I came up with is the fact that I don't think that I want to run a roof. I'm going to run it topless, not quite Targa style, but more convertible style. And while that may not be accurate to the actual 954 Rothman's build, I think that it's going to be the most appropriate for us, because that truck didn't run massive rock crawler tires, and it's not solid axle either. So you can understand where I'm going. So I'm gonna do a cage with an interior in there. It will also offer us some flexibility with the style and design, and maybe a little bit more maximized for performance as far as rollover ability and little details like that. But that again will come down the road. I am looking forward to it, and I think that the topless design will look pretty good. I plan to do a full custom chassis underneath of it, very specifically made and fit to the design of the body and whatever drivetrain that goes into it. This Class 1 Jeep was a VS410 chassis, almost stock front to back with VFD transmission, F10 axles, very much like my VS410 Phoenix. It's very, very similar. On this truck, any of the solid molds that I used were all 3D printed, completely start to finish. And on this next go round, I'm probably gonna lean on that a good bit, but I may also try some new things. And that is, I'm gonna try and CNC some of my molds. I did buy some upgrades for my Stepcraft D600 CNC to allow me to run longer parts like those 3D machined molds that I hope to be able to do. In the next episode, probably do a little bit of upgrading on that machine and hopefully show you some parts being milled. I still have a lot of decisions to make as far as exactly what parts are going to be used in the truck, and I need to get on making those decisions and getting them here ASAP so I can get some things sitting together so that I have the base for the new truck. I'd love to have some sort of start on that for the next video you see. My goal for the next episode of the Class 1 is having the first molds for the parts finished and ready to go, as well as having at least one part off of the molds, whether it be a hood or a fender, maybe a side. The sides are the largest pieces on that. I think that I want to just try and go with something simpler. The hood is kind of the easiest, most low depth item on the whole build. So I feel like that's kind of where I want to start. I'd like to have a rough design of the chassis itself and probably just CNC cut it out of something like ABS so I can start to bolt it together and start figuring out if I need to make changes here or there before I go to the final material that I decide to make it out of, whether that be some CNC carbon fiber that I can do here myself, or if I go a little bit more exotic and I make the entire chassis out of titanium. This project is going to be a joint project between Matt and myself. So everything that I do, I'm going to be sharing those design files and everything with Matt so that he can be constructing his version in parallel with me. It'll help with motivation, helping to bounce things back and forth, and hopefully we end up with two very similar but unique vehicles in their own way. I'm super pumped for that part of this. So Class 2. This is, like I said, the comp rig that I've been running locally here for months and months now. It's a carbon fiber chassis that I cut here myself. It's got F10 portals on it and a VFD transmission that actually has a shorter top shaft, and I'm running a Holmes Hobbies revolver motor in there. And I'm doing that because I've got a servo on axle mount that was custom machined. Now, that means that my servo sits nice down and low there, and I've got a 4-link front suspension. Now, I run this setup here locally because we don't run SORRCA points. There's no advantage to having a chassis mounted servo. So I just went with what is the absolute most beneficial thing to me for performance. As I mentioned though, we don't run any SORRCA points, so there is nothing else about this truck that has any detail to it. It is just a very standard flat rail chassis and the bare bones to get this thing driving. This is what I was using when we were testing the VXT2 tires. You saw that in a video back then. You've also seen some comp coverage of this exact truck. So what I'm thinking for class 2 is I'm going to take the design of this chassis and just make another one so that I can build a truck that is SORRCA compliant. Rather than just going the easy route and throwing a Power Wagon body on it and doing whatever I need to do to get some points, I do want to change things up a little bit. And that's why you see the monthly Mayhem VS410 Phoenix here, because what I want to do is something very similar to what I did here, meaning that I want to cut the roof off, add a cage, and narrow the body. I took about 1 inch out of the center of this body, got it narrowed way down, giving it a pretty unique look, 3D printed a new grille that made it the proper width at that, and that's the route that I think I'm gonna go for class 2. It will be unique. It will also be a body that obviously means something to me as well. Now, the rear bed sides of the Phoenix can be a little bit long for a competition scenario. They hang back a little bit further to be a little bit more scale. Probably almost a year ago, we actually designed up a mold to make some new rear bed sides for the Phoenix. Took and shortened the model of the rear bed sides to take a bunch of the length out of the rear portion just behind the wheel wells. And then I'm just gonna vacuum form myself some new fenders from this. I 3D print these molds and I leave the bottom open. That's because I'll backfill this mold with plaster of Paris. That makes this whole mold just rock solid, and any heat from the heated plastic that would get vacuum formed over it doesn't deform the actual 3D print anymore because it doesn't really have anywhere to go. The other option would be to take this kind of same design that I already have here and make the negative of it so that I could carbon fiber mold them to be even a little bit more special. That would be an option. I've thought about that with the body so that I could carbon mold a new body. I think that I should just focus on my class 1 though, and just do what I gotta do to make a cool class 2, but not get ridiculous. Taking and blending these two trucks, I think will give me a pretty cool outcome. I know how this truck drives, and I think that would be a great choice for me to go with something that I know. However, with the servo and axle, it will be a little bit different from if I have to go to CMF, just based on the total number of SORRCA points I need. I have to go through and do all of those calculations to make a lot of decisions, but that's on my list to do very shortly. But similarly to the class 1, I had considered having this chassis cut from titanium just to make it a little bit different, and any of the cage work and anything else that I want to do to it, I can just weld right into the chassis. I like the idea of that. I think it would give it a little bit of a flair of being special or different without really being all that much more work, and even less work in some situations, because if I can weld directly to the chassis, it saves me time rather than having to weld to plates and mounts and bolting them together. So it's a consideration for that reason. Is titanium cooler than carbon fiber? That's a real tough question for me to ask. I'm a big fan of both. But now for class 3. We did just have the Axial SCX10 Pro released. Now, I haven't driven this truck yet, so I don't necessarily have any familiarity with it at this point. I feel like it could be a class 3 base for me. With class 3, I do need to have 4-wheel steer. I think that these axles could be very easily converted to 4-wheel steer, so that would be a benefit as far as that goes. Now, they're not all that wide. By the time Nationals rolls around, maybe we'll have wider tubes available so I could make it wider and 4-wheel steer. but that's a bit of a gamble as far as class 3 goes and the timeline for this. Being that in class 3 this year, you need to run a tire that is over 4.75 as a minimum. It has to be larger than 4.75. So the new Proline Hyrax LPs are 5¼ inches tall. And that seems like a decent option. But with that, I would like to make the truck just a little bit wider, a little bit longer overall to take advantage of that tire height. I also don't have a production version of the SCX10 Pro yet. So depending on how long I want to wait to get started, that is a concern. Now, what I could do is just make another copy of what I'm planning to run already for class 2 and make that a dedicated class 3. And I also need to decide on what the body choice for class 3 would be. Do I use a body that I've had for a little while and just got back from paint? And that is the Delta Plastics Mon 14. Is this the time for this to finally make it onto a truck? Poor-SHA just painted this thing for me and he gold leafed the design right onto the side. The Mon 14 is special for a lot of reasons. Maybe this is the time it finally finds a home. I mean, with a little bit of extra wheelbase and the larger tires, like, that's pretty special. So this weekend, you didn't get to see a lot of physical progression, but the hours that I've already added up into getting the design of the Class 911 ready to go has been a huge effort. And while I'm worried that that may not have made for the most interesting episode this week, I'm just taking you along for the ride because there could be a massive failure ahead or some version of success. I need the motivation because there's a huge hill in front of me and I have my fingers crossed that I'm capable of pulling it off in some fashion. But that's gonna do it for most of this video. I do wanna pass off to you guys though, titanium or carbon fiber on the chassis. Do I make them all the same? Do I go with carbon on some, titanium on others? Does the Mon 14 get a ticket to the big show for class 3? That's the one I really wanna know. What's your choices on a class 3 body? If this isn't a different type of choice, I don't know what is. So as always, thanks for watching. Hit the like button if you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you're not already. Hit the notification bell so you see the videos as soon as they get uploaded. We got a long road to go in a short amount of time, so back to work.